There are two kinds of history. Official history, the kind which is taught in schools. Then there's secret history, a scandalous kind of history which explains how things really happened. This is the story of Australia's secret history. ASIO is Australia's leading intelligence agency, set up to identify spies and subversives who threaten the state from within. It has opened files on hundreds of thousands of citizens, creating a unique history of dissent. These files are dark biographies in which all suspects are guilty. Our series tells a few of the stories from the previously secret intelligence files of these persons of interest. Frank Hardy, author, the most Australian, born Southern Cross, 21st of March 1917, died 28th of January 1994.
Secret, non gratis, May 1945. The Communist Party, he claimed, was the greatest unifying force in the community, and supporting the Communist Party meant supporting the liberation of mankind.
Frank Hardy was the public face of communism in Australia. Even during the Cold War, he proudly proclaimed his communist beliefs. His story reflects the fortunes of the Communist Party itself and the struggle to reconcile crimes committed in the name of communism. He would become the most famous and controversial writer in the country, his books banned, and Hardy himself arrested and tried for criminal libel.
Frank was my father, first of all, but he was an original, a communist, but a larrikin and a writer. And all three of those roles he played to the hilt.
The usual gathering of the Communist Party was held at the Yarra Bank on 13th of June 1943 at 1500 hours. The chairman was Private Hardy. This speaker is by far the most emphatic I have heard.
This is the famed Speaker's Quarter at the Yarra Bank in Melbourne, where on the 13th of June 1943, my father, Frank Hardy, spoke at a Communist Party meeting, urging the crowd to support the Curtin government and the war effort.
The ASIO file shows quite clearly that this is the first reference to Hardy speaking as a radical, as a communist supporter, and the notes that are taken then in the 1940s begin the first of what becomes an enormous file that ASIO then maintained on Frank Hardy until his death some 50 years later.
The Realist Writers Group promoted and published Australian literature and was sponsored by the Communist Party. Frank Hardy was a founding member, and his longtime friends and fellow communists, author Alan Marshall and poet Judah Watton, were also members. Hardy's dramatic relationship with these men and with communist journalist Paul Mortier would come to mirror his stormy relationship with the party itself.
Is that amendment? Yeah. Beautiful, thank you, thank you.
Frank's son Alan became a writer too, and until now has never seen his father's ASIO file. Hardy's file began to grow quickly with the release of his first book, Power Without Glory, a story about capitalism and its power to corrupt. Communist Party support for the book had attracted ASIO's attention, and its release coincided with the Menzies government attempt to outlaw the Communist Party.
Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
ASIO now drew up lists of people to be locked in detention camps when the party was banned.
I believe that the Communist parties financially supported the writing of Power Without Glory because they felt that they wanted to have some impact in the literary world, because they felt Australian literature was mostly ivory tower stuff. So they wanted a book that would tell their story and their side of Australian life.
Despite the fact that Hardy tried to to keep a degree of secrecy around the fact that he was writing what was in effect an expose of one of Melbourne's most powerful financiers, the financier and Labor Party supporter John Wren. Nevertheless, it was very widely known that he was working on this book. So Hardy had a strong sense of being watched really from the time he began writing Power Without Glory in the late 1940s.
Melbourne, August 1950. Special announcement. August 4th is the publication date of a significant Australian novel, Power Without Glory by Frank Hardy.
Word of mouth spread. People would lend copies to each other. It became an underground hit. Here at the Yarra Bank in November, he challenged John Wren to sue him for libel if he thought that he was represented in the book as John West. Unfortunately, John Wren took him up on the challenge and Frank was charged with criminal libel. You know, you sue someone for libel, and if they're guilty, they've got to pay you some money. But criminal libel was an old English law that hadn't been used for over 100 years, which said that the libel was so bad, it would cause disruption in society and cause uprising and ferment. And therefore, the libel had to be addressed by the criminal system, not by the civil.
To Director General, Frank Hardy Defence Committee. The persons comprising the New South Wales Committee are on record as being supporters of the Australian Communist Party. Secret, 20th of November 1950, Frank Hardy Defence Committee. I wish to advise that on Friday the 17th instant at 8 p.m, I attended the second floor of the Ironworkers Hall, 188 George Street, where a meeting of the Frank Hardy Defence Committee was held. The meeting was opened by the chairman, Muir Holborn. Frank Hardy then read one of his short stories, The Load of Wood. He admitted to the audience that he was a communist and became a writer through working amongst the working class and seeing their conditions. There were about 230 people present.
Almost always, ASIO had their own person in these very obscure left-wing groups, monitoring what was being said, monitoring who was in attendance.
Tom Shepherd was an ASIO agent for 24 years. Targeted at the Communist Party, he attended hundreds of meetings, reporting everything back to his handler.
Being an agent and contributing to somebody's file is almost doing a hatchet job on them. Because once you have an ASIO file, if ever you apply for a position that needs a clearance from ASIO, it's unlikely that you'll get that position. It's distressing to think the harm that I may have done.
The Communist Party Dissolution Bill and Frank Hardy's libel case with its communist connections ran in parallel. Hardy was arrested 5 days after the bill became law.
The Communist Party Dissolution Bill had enormous impact on my family because it seemed so linked to the Power Without Glory case. People thought that the party would be forced to go underground, they'd have to destroy documents and files, and that people may well be arrested. There was talk of internment camps and lists of names being prepared, and I can imagine the Hardy family would have been very high on the list.
The unions and the Communist Party challenged the legality of the bill in the High Court.
The Communist Party case was not only a case that affected, as it happened, a member of my family, the National Treasurer of the Communist Party, Jack Simpson, who married my grandmother as a second marriage, but it was of great importance to the people in the Commonwealth of Australia. The problem with the Communist Party Dissolution Act was that it simply took a complete step of proscribing the Communist Party and outlawing or depriving its members of civil liberties, and that, it was held by the High Court, was a step too far.
1 week after the High Court rejected Menzies' bill, the jury retired to consider Frank Hardy's fate. It took just 17 minutes to find him not guilty.
To Director Victoria, Francis Joseph Hardy, it would be appreciated if you could obtain a list of the members of the jury which acquitted subject. Should any be recorded, a summary of their file would also be appreciated. CCF Spry, Director General.
This is the bit that I found scary, that it would be appreciated if you could obtain a list of the members of the jury which acquitted subject. Should any be recorded, a summary of their file would also be appreciated. In other words, if any had an ASIO file.
Oh, because then it would be
that's
a conspiracy.
Marieke Hardy is Alan's daughter, Frank's granddaughter, and is also a writer. 50 years on, it can be hard to explain the extent of the hot war against communism to an incredulous younger generation. Support for Hardy from across the arts scene attracted ASIO's attention. Now culture itself became a fellow traveller with communism. Prime Minister Menzies ordered lists of those applying for literary grants be submitted for security checks and his approval. This interest in writers, painters, actors and filmmakers was to last for the next 30 years and included files on actors like Peter Finch and Leonard Teale, film reviewer David Stratton, writers Christina Stead and Christopher Koch, poets Kenneth Slessor and Michael Dransfield, artists Lloyd Rees and Chips McAnulty, and the Melbourne and Sydney film festivals.
Headquarters ASIO, B1. A reliable Q source has reported that Hardy proposes to leave Australia by sea on the 5th of July 1951 for the purpose of attending the Berlin Youth Festival. It is believed that Melbourne wharfies will headquarters ASIO, B1. The Hardys are occupying first-class cabins numbers 371 and 372. The Hardys were kept under observation until the vessel sailed at midnight, but were not seen to contact any persons of security interest.
And that was where kids got left at home and they went overseas for months and months and months.
Who looked after you?
We went and lived with people almost in hiding up in the country.
In hiding?
Well, we were not, because of the threats against the family after the Power Without Glory case, they just thought it'd be safer for them to go away and us to go and live in the country. I found it very tough. It deeply affected me being left there and not being with my parents. He saw and they showed him what he wanted to see of the perfect society. The society was working for the working man, that everyone was happy, everyone had a fair go, everyone was well paid, there was no unemployment, there was sickness benefits, all the things we didn't have in Australia that they had in the Soviet Union. He never saw any of the dark side.
To Director. A tentative return booking from London has been made on the Orcades. The following amount has been paid in cash by Hardy, £438, 19
On landing in Fremantle, Hardy's passport was confiscated. His appeal to have it returned was rejected by the Minister, Harold Holt. However, the attacks on Hardy resumed. Rosslyn wanted to move, and a £1,000 win at the races financed the trip to Sydney. This move would take them to the heart of socialist politics in Australia and put Frank in close touch with Communist Party leaders.
This is Horizon, Powderworks Road, Narrabeen North, where we moved when we first came up from Melbourne in 1954. The family left Melbourne because life got very difficult post-Power Without Glory. He felt, and Mum felt, by moving here and starting afresh, we'd get away from that pressure. I can remember many party meetings, realist writers meetings, because you imagine it was a great house for people to gather. It was a hotbed of left activity in the outer suburbs of Sydney. Also, a lot of communists lived in this area too, from my memory. I was just down here in Warriewood, the next suburb. I remember there were a lot of market gardens, a lot of Yugoslavs who, I'm sure I remember coming to the house, who were Tito supporters, probably much to ASIO's chagrin.
Henry Hatfield, a Central Committee member. On the left is Alec Robertson, then Mavis Robertson, Andrew Johnman Wallace of Victoria with his back to the camera, and Emmanuel Burnham in the dark coat. They are joined by Herbert Chandler. Paul Francis Mortier in a white shirt with Harry Stein, both of New South Wales. Mortier is a reporter on the Tribune and Stein is active among New Australians.
Agents mentioned an ASIO photograph of Alan Kenneth Hardy and states that it is an excellent likeness to the person referred to in Q report as Frank Hardy's son. Young Hardy resides around Elizabeth Way with another boy. He is very interested in theatrics.
Well, you know,
I need a copy of that. I need to frame that.
Should just write gay.
Yeah.
They then obviously were on the money because they described me in the following manner. He is employed by Dalgetty's as a truck driver, has tattoo marks on his arms and wears his blonde hair rather long. This, I'm afraid, is not me. I'm afraid I am the thin boy interested in theatrics.
Do you know anyone that, or suspect anyone who might have given this information?
No idea.
There was the hint of a full-time job as an operative and then of moving into another sphere of the ASIO bureaucracy.
I think a lot of agents their morale had to be kept up, and so they were told all sorts of things, that they were doing great things for their country, and maybe that there was even ultimately a job in it for them, that they'd be protected and so on. But mostly this didn't come to anything. They were being used by ASIO, and a lot of them came down to earth with a thud after that.
Even with his own comrades, Hardy had to fight to get culture onto the agenda.
Resolution. In view of the fact that the revised party program contains no reference to the need to defend and develop our national culture, I would like to move the following resolution calling for action to defend and foster democratic Australian culture in literature, painting, theatre, films, etc. Comrade Frank Hardy.
Moon Hampson, secretary of the new theatre group, with Len Donald. They stop at the car, which is driven by John Armstrong, and they are joined by Olive Murray Armstrong, National Secretary of the New Theatre League.
Well, the New Theatre was theatre with communist connections, and there was a party faction that ran the theatre, but the average member of the New Theatre was, I suppose a lot of them were left-wingers, but also just ordinary people who wanted to be involved in theatre, because in those days there wasn't the opportunity for people to act and get professional work, so a lot of people acted in amateur theatre like the New.
Yes, I went to New Theatre. All communists went to New Theatre.
Eddie Allison and Milton Moore. Yeah, and the New Theatre. Well, there's Dad there, definitely, with his own placard.
Oh my God, is that you? That's you.
It is me, isn't it?
Yeah.
Me, there I am. Yeah. So it was a wonderful place to be involved in, but no doubt, as I've discovered from reading these papers, ASIO was aware of every single thing that we did. And that's Roger Millis with the top hat being the capitalist.
I've got the ASIO's complete files on New Theatre up to about 1970, and I think they run to something like 2,500 pages. It's quite incredible. We naturally assumed that there were plants in New Theatre, and we were very guarded about our revealing our membership and things like that.
Minute for Regional Directors, South Australia. Frank Hardy. An untried source stated that the above-named person attended a private party given to the members of the cast of the New Theatre League production, Lawson. At the party, Hardy became very intoxicated and appeared to be discontented and extremely insulting to other guests. After the party, Peter Storley was overheard to say that Hardy was to be disciplined by the party. The source claimed that
Hardy's speech was grammatically incorrect, which appeared to indicate that he had had a poor education, but apart from this seemed to have an amazing mind and a good personality.
I mean, Frank always wanted to make films, but he always wanted to make films in Australia and couldn't understand why there wasn't an Australian film industry. And I'd say he must have been in the, late 50s. He was involved with Cecil Holmes in making a film called 3 in 1, which was a film made by Cecil of 3 Australian stories. One, The Union Buries Its Dead by Henry Lawson. One, The Loaderwood by Frank Hardy.
Secret, non gratis. Frank Hardy is investing a sum of money in the production of a 3-reel film. Cecil Holmes is to produce the film. The money Hardy is investing in the film comes from the sale of his book, Power Without Glory.
There was Darky quite calmly cutting down one of old Paddy Shea's trees. And I was scared stiff.
Dominated by foreign interests, film production was at a standstill, and opportunities for actors, writers and artists were limited. But with the Communist Party supporting increased Australian content on TV, organisations like Actors Equity became suspects.
My dear PM, I attach a paper entitled The Communist Party and the National Television Congress. Veteran communist writer Frank Hardy asserted in typical communist fashion that increased Australian content of TV drama would help the Australian people retain their healthy national identity.
A tidal wave was about to engulf communists all over the world. 1956 was the year in which Premier Khrushchev denounced his predecessor Stalin as a criminal. It was also the year in which he sent troops in to crush an anti-Soviet uprising in communist Hungary.
This is Hungary calling. This is Hungary calling. For the sake of God and freedom and of Hungary.
This was a turning point for communists. Many people resigned from the party, and many more were expelled for their support of Hungary. But Frank Hardy and Paul Mortier not only stayed, but helped enforce the party line amongst artists and intellectuals. Hardy even convinced his friend Judah Watton to rejoin the party. These crises of faith would be repeated down the years.
Well, Frank always used to quote a man who used to speak on the Domain in Sydney, in the Speaker's Corner there. He was always saying whatever the communists did in Russia was good because they were building socialism. And someone yelled out from the crowd, "They eat their babies in Russia." And the Speaker paused for a moment and said, "Yes, comrade, but they're building socialism." And that was Frank's answer. In other words, he always felt that you had to make tough decisions and tough things had to happen and people got hurt, but for the betterment of society.
This is the famous Manly Corso. Back here in the 1950s, my father stood for the federal election for the Communist Party. And he held a street meeting down here. And that night at the street meeting, the local member, W.C. Wentworth, came to heckle him. And he called out from the crowd, he said, "Hey, you're a communist. If you had 2 cars, would you give me one?" And he said, "No. If I had 2 brains, I'd give you one." They were sworn political enemies at that time. But it wasn't too many years later, they ended up on the same side in the struggle for Aboriginal land rights for the Gurindji. Strange bedfellows indeed. This is now an upmarket bar, but when we lived here in the 1960s, it was a cockroach-infested, run-down apartment. And this was the built-in veranda, which became Frank's office, and from here he wrote some of his finest works, looking out over Manly Beach. I know he created a character, F.J. Borky, the writer, who lived in a seedy flat in Manly and used to peep through the blinds for the debt collectors waiting for him out in the street.
In reality, some of those in the street were ASIO officers. Whilst Hardy was being watched, ASIO was running other operations on the Manly Corso right next to his flat. This time against the KGB in the form of Ivan Skripov, a Russian intelligence officer intent on recruiting Sylvia, a woman who had already contacted ASIO and was now acting as a double agent.
Surveillance was important because it allowed us to establish patterns of behaviour. Not only where people went, when they went to those places, who they met. These are all important things in establishing whether a person was involved in intelligence activities.
Skripov was declared persona non grata and expelled. It was one of the very few successes ASIO had in counter-espionage.
The turning point in Hardy's attitude was when he visited the Soviet Union to write a very ambitious book about the place under Khrushchev. He still had not come to grips with Stalinism at that time. This was 1962. When he went over to research the book, I was working in Moscow at the time, and he looked me up and we saw each other quite a fair bit during his stay. Now, he toured the whole country. Everywhere that Frank went in the Soviet Union, he ran into people who had suffered under Stalin, and that sort of experience changed his attitude to everything.
While in Russia, Hardy met Yevgeny Yevtushenko, a poet and committed communist who had criticised the Russian party and lived to tell the tale. Hardy invited Yevtushenko to visit Australia.
To him, he saw this was the great hope. He was an artist who could criticise the leaders in the Soviet Union, but was a communist. And to him, this was the way it should always work.
ASIO had a team at the airport to observe party members waiting to greet the poet. They used what they call a butterbox, a camera hidden inside a briefcase. Here, Frank Hardy stares at the disguised camera without realising it. Yevtushenko took to capitalism with gusto, and like Hardy, was a larrikin. An ASIO agent recounts the events of a night on the town with Hardy and Yevtushenko attending a performance by Rolf Harris and an encounter with Jan Renison, former Miss Australia and recent James Bond girl.
He asked him up on stage. He refused. He said it was beneath his dignity to be associated with such goings-on, and particularly with anything to do with James Bond.
Harris drove with Yevtushenko, Miss Henderson and Frank Hardy to Hardy's home at Manly, where Yevtushenko was staying. But this time Yevtushenko was
almost blind drunk.
To be physically restrained by Hardy from manhandling Miss Renison, who had rebuffed him.
Oh no, he was highly incensed and yelled, "You will not make love with the greatest poet in the world."
Case officer's comment described Yevtushenko as a drunken, lecherous, conceited gutter snipe and as a pig of a man. Typical night out with Frank Hardy.
Yeah.
I love seeing Frank restraining him.
I know.
So you support ASIO? And
yeah, what I'm saying is I support ASIO, particularly attending parties.
Frank Hardy was recently described by a leading CPA member as a degenerate bourgeois who goes around borrowing money and not paying it back, and that certainly was true. Before he went overseas, Hardy was called up before the party leaders and told he was wrong in his attitude. Big bloody help. The general opinion is that he has learned a lot from his trip overseas. I'm sorry, party, he didn't. Criticism has been levelled at Hardy for sending his wife out to work to keep the family. God save us from the bloody... The communists were such prudes, you know. And Frank was never a good match for that side of communism. I'm sure ASIO enjoyed the fact that Frank had a very fractious relationship with the party. He was very active and worked for the party, you know, tirelessly throughout his life. But he was always the troubled son, the prodigal, the one. Oh, what are we going to do about Frank? You know.
And he's just getting over the fence. And so help me, as luck would have it, the wife of this bloke that owns these fowls sees him. And she said, "Hey, come back here, Chuck Henderson it was." She knew it was Chuck.
Frank wrote a series of books, The Yarns of Billy Borker. This was the larrikin side of Frank's character, telling the funny stories that he'd grown up telling, that he learnt from his father, and stories of his own. And he had no problem. There was the political activist and the writer of serious work and the Billy Borker writer, and he did both quite happily.
Frank Hardy, communist author of Power Without Glory, has been commissioned to write a 20-segment TV comedy show by the Australian Broadcasting Commission. It has recently been reported to this office by a delicate source that Clement Semler, the Assistant General Manager of the ABC, was a close friend of Frank Hardy, the communist journalist and author. Semler is said to be of German descent.
Quite apart from the fact that if Mr. Hardy has any sense of humour, he's the only commo who has. There's a bit of editorialising here. And has never shown any signs of it, which adds up to flop programs.
5th of August 1968. Communist Party of Australia interest in Australian Broadcasting Commission. The Director-General ASIO authorised the General Manager ABC be kept informed of anybody who comes to notice adversely at the ABC. The Director-General instructed that nothing be committed to paper.
Frank contacted Mavis Robertson, who was a communist. Hardy referred to a cheque which went through satisfactorily, which was unusual in our family, and then told Robertson he had just signed a contract for $1,600 on a new Borker thing, but said it will take a few weeks to materialise. Then asked if it would be possible to make an exchange for about a week for the same amount. Hardy said, "This 1,000,000 to 1 chance is a possibility I would get Alan to come in and get it." Gee, I never got that. Is there any chance of checking now? Robertson told him there was not, and he said he would ring again at noon. Oh, this is very sad. This was Frank's constant struggle for money. Because he didn't earn enough, but also when he got it, he would gamble it away, and He would try and beg, borrow and steal money from anywhere he could, and dealing with bank managers and credit and debt and was a constant battle. It must have been terrible for my mother. I know it was terrible for my mother.
I don't think anything I passed on was of any importance other than these people believed in the socialist society where there was social equality and equality of means, and people were encouraged to become a proud member of a society.
August 1965. A Communist Party Intellectuals Commission has been set up, and the following have been proposed as members: Eric Ahrens, Paul Mortier, Frank Hardy.
Within weeks of this committee being formed, Paul Mortier committed suicide. The misplaced faith in the mass murderer Stalin had become too much. Mortier had been one of Hardy's best friends. From their army days through the revelations of Stalin's crimes, they had stuck with the party. His death was a low point for Hardy. Doubts about communism, money trouble, and writer's block set in.
He was completely stuck. He'd run out of things to write. He couldn't write at all. He then went to the Northern Territory, basically to get away from himself and his money troubles.
Intercept report, 3rd of June 1966. Judah Watton to Hira Watton. Judah said that he had also received a letter from Frank Hardy in Sydney. He was going away to think about things, look into himself.
Frank Hardy stated recently that there are only about 4 members of the Communist Party in Darwin and they're all half mad. He said there are another 4 who think they're members of the party, but they've been expelled. Well, that was the Communist Party.
Case officer's comment. When Frank Hardy was in Darwin recently, he was just about flat broke. He borrowed £100 from Jo Cunningham, for which he gave her a cheque. The cheque was returned by the ES&A Bank in Darwin because of insufficient funds.
In the Northern Territory, he heard from his longtime friend and filmmaker Cecil Holmes that the Gurindji station workers in Wave Hill had gone on strike over their conditions.
And I suppose you had a tribe of illiterate people who'd been taught by the white man to muster cattle but never taught to read and write, who needed someone with words to tell their story. And he was a man who'd lost the power of words.
Secret. Frank Hardy is currently staying in Darwin. He is residing with Cecil and Sandra Holmes. Hardy is a real firebrand. It is quite obvious that Hardy has been sent up to Darwin by the party to cause trouble amongst the Aboriginals. August 21st of August 1968, Gurindji land rights. The Gurindjis did not know the difference between a communist and a capitalist. They think that Frank Hardy is a wonderful chap and that welfare are a pack of no-hopers. The unions and rights councils...
The unions, rights councils, etc. are going to launch an appeal down south to give supplies and backing to the Gurindjis so they can stay at Waddy Creek indefinitely.
I believe the hardcore 50 at least will stay there until doomsday if they have to.
Well, the agent was right.
Yeah.
They gave him the words, so he wrote their story. It gave him the ability to write again and gave them a spokesperson. He wrote their plea to the Governor-General to get the land back, and then he went back and lobbied politicians and the party and unions and brought Gurindjis to Sydney.
ASIO now began opening files on the Gurindji themselves as they became persons of interest.
The party itself was pretty plain. They were the Communist Party. And with the Aborigines, because it was the communists who believed in equality, the communists who believed that black and white could live together, the communists who believed that Aborigines should get equal pay, suddenly that had to be evil because there were suddenly organisations that represented Aboriginals in their struggle, like the Save the Gurindji Fund, that had to be a communist front, that had to have ulterior motives of overthrowing society and bringing in the KGB. It couldn't just be to help Aborigines, in ASIO's mind. Yet, in fact, it was.
ASIO really exaggerated the power of the Communist Party. They saw its hidden hand everywhere, and it's true, the Communist Party was very active. But in the end, they were attributing all kinds of movements for social change to a communist inspiration. And this was really a wild exaggeration.
An ASIO file is a dark biography of the person of interest, and Frank Hardy's file reveals 1968 as the year in which he was most active and influential. He was front and centre in land rights, an uprising in Czechoslovakia, and an impending split in the party.
And they reported that the Gurindji Aborigines, 37% of them, only 37% of them, said we should get out of Vietnam. But they didn't tell you that 99% of them said we should get out of Australia.
Intercept report. Mavis Robertson contacted Carolyn Ahrens. She thinks that her husband, Laurie Ahrens, had been arrested. Robertson gave an account of the demonstration. She said that Frank Hardy was bloody marvellous. Demonstration for Aboriginal rights outside Parliament House, Melbourne, on Friday, 12th of July, 1968. The crowd were addressed by Frank Hardy on the current situation of the Gurindji tribe at Wave Hill Station. Hardy was followed by Harry Penrith, an Aboriginal.
By this stage, suspicion was so great that even those reporting the news became persons of interest. Here, Frank Hardy is photographed coming back from shooting a story on the Gurindji struggle. The Channel 9 TV crew have numbers and ASIO files.
But there's accusations made on the film by Vincent Lingiari that Minister Wentworth had promised the Gurindji land. So now you had Wentworth adopting a policy of Frank Hardy and the communists, much to the chagrin of the Liberal Party, who were trying to stop that very thing happening. And I know that Frank had lobbied Wentworth, and two men who could not have been more opposed about the way to deal with society were suddenly on the same side. And I find this is the first time I'm aware of this today.
Brothers, friends. On August the 21st, 1968, the Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia to crush a movement intent on humanising communist dictatorship.
Secret. Intercept report. Judah Watton to John Sendy. He had heard that Frank Hardy was going to Prague. Watton thought that all the brightest people were going to Prague.
He visited Prague just weeks after the invasion and then went on to Russia, where he gathered material for a Sunday Times article he was to write. A piece that would change his life and explode on the political scene like a bomb in November 1968.
He said, that's the sort of socialism that I've always fought for. This is what I wanted. This is why I've stuck solid. Stalin's heirs have skulked in the shadows awaiting their chance. Like Stalin, they fear the people and the truth. And this is Frank saying it from the heart. These are wonderful articles that, you know, all the built-up years of frustration when he clearly didn't believe in what was being done but thought, I've got to stick with it because they're building socialism. You know, they eat their babies in Russia. Now he had a chance to say, this is the real Frank. Frank believed in what was happening in Czechoslovakia. This is what he believed, that communism, socialism could work. And he was an example, and the Russians just rode roughshod over it.
ASIO, minute paper. To all intents and purposes, this article was written by a man who is completely disillusioned with communism as practiced in the USSR today. It is severely critical of the party bureaucracy. David Ross, in recent conversations, stated that Laurie Ahrens had informed him that Frank Hardy has gone off the rails. He has an ego problem. Intercept report, December 4th, 1968. Judah Watton to Alan Marshall. They both agreed that Hardy would never be able to go back to Russia now.
Marshall didn't know how Hardy would get along with the communists in Australia. Watton replied that he had some friends, but underneath he wouldn't have a lot of friends.
Outward message. It is believed that a CPA National Executive meeting will be held at 1400 hours today, 24th of January 1969, at which the recent press articles of Frank Hardy will be discussed.
While the party attacked him publicly, privately, I'd say the vast majority of the party agreed with Frank because they were They weren't the enemy. It's like ASIO tried to get us to believe. These people believed in socialism as a good thing, as everyone benefiting, not from repressive Stalinism.
Top Secret and Protect. Operation Bossa Nova, January 24th, 1969. Communist Party. Special National Executive Meeting from an ASIO microphone in the meeting room. Alec Robertson. There is a great deal of organised, deliberate confusion going on that confuses...
From its hidden microphone inside the party meeting room, ASIO listened as party official Alec Robertson pointed out that many members had expressed opinions just like Frank Hardy's. Whilst committee members are there to discuss Hardy's anti-Soviet articles, it quickly becomes a major conflict. Party Secretary Laurie Ahrens says that there is evidence of organised opposition groups involving committee member Bill Brown and his group who support the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. Ahrens says that they are facing a serious split in the party and a direct challenge to his leadership. He won't expel Hardy. Hardy's story gave ASIO an insight to the internal dramas racking the party.
We were one of the most critical of all the communist parties in the world about that invasion, and that led to another group, pro-Soviet group, under the leadership of Bill Brown, to form another breakaway, the Socialist Party of Australia.
Intercept report. Judah Watton to Alan Marshall. Watton mentioned the article in the Australian today on the Communist Party. He said that this article was calculated to do the most damage. Watton said that this shows what a dirty bastard Frank Hardy is.
The Soviets desperately tried to reconcile the two sides, first meeting Party Secretary Laurie Ahrens in Rushcutters Bay Park on April 6, 1972, and then 24 hours later, Bill Brown in Vaucluse Park, all watched by ASIO.
Members of the Communist Party of Australia had a wide range of techniques for evading ASIO. Often they'd come to a busy corner like this, and they would talk to one another in a whisper. And they would talk into one another's ears so that it was impossible for an ASIO man to either record them,
I was in a very difficult situation. I was working full-time for ASIO. The pressures were enormous. I became paranoid about who was following me, where I was being followed, and I took to drinking. I broke down and rang my handler's wife, and I literally broke down in tears and in a drunken stupor of what am I doing, what I'm doing is wrong, it's immoral.
One of the traps is to not terminate agents once their usefulness is either gone altogether or is no longer there, because sometimes it's very hard to terminate long-term agents because there's going to be problems. So the temptation is keep them on. They're more brutal now, which is good, but we had some agents there who'd been there for, I'm talking 20-year agents, mate, and they get hooked on the tax-free. The other thing is, with termination of agents, what's always in the back of your mind is they'll go bad and they'll go to the media and it'll be a big pain in the arse to everyone.
Using the suicide of his friend, the writer and intellectual Paul Mortier, as his centrepiece, Hardy now set about writing his greatest work, But the Dead Are Many, an insight into a life in the Communist Party and the dilemma of faith abused.
Hardy wants press clippings from Tribune about visits paid to Paul Mortier by ASIO. Alec Robertson contacted Frank Hardy and said that he had found the one about Paul Mortier. Robertson said that it gave details about the conversation and descriptions of both agents, Leo Carter and Norm Maloney.
But the Dead Are Many is, he considered his best work. It's certainly, I think, a wonderful piece of work. And it is the definitive book if you want to understand the thinkings of a communist who joined the party in the 1930s, thinking that Uncle Joe Stalin was the saviour. Then to feel the betrayal of that when they realised that this wasn't true, and how they could match those two things, their belief in the principles and the betrayal of the dictator. And that struggle within is reflected superbly in But the Dead Are Many, through the main character, John Morell, who ends up committing suicide.
Confidential. A reception to launch a new book by Frank Hardy was held in the Communist Party headquarters. About 100 to 120 people attended. Many of these people have not been seen in years. Agent comment. Laurie Ahrens hung on Hardy's coattails all evening and introduced Hardy to those present as his longtime friend, and intimated that Hardy is a firm supporter of Ahrens' ideals.
Many of those post-war believers had become almost, I suppose, monastic is a good word. They had structured their lives around those beliefs, become loyal party members, appeared at party functions, devoted themselves to the party cause. And that his very close friend, for example, Paul Mortier, who is portrayed, some would say in the book, through one of the lead characters, Morell in the book, found it extremely difficult and eventually impossible to continue once those blinkers come off.
By the mid-1980s, it became apparent that the Communist Party of Australia had really degenerated into not much more than a talking club. They posed no real threat to Australian security, and therefore no longer justified ASIO interest.
In later years, I remember, and this is going into the 1980s, he used to maintain that he would be the last communist standing in Australia.
The last page in your ASIO file is often your death notice cut from the newspaper. When the page concerning his death in 1994 is released, Frank Hardy's will note the old communist, the last man standing, was given a huge funeral and a eulogy delivered by an ex-Prime Minister. The living are few, but the dead are many. In whatever manner people think a thing will come to pass, it is often different when it happens. Frank Hardy once said, "You can tell a man by his enemies, and mine are a right pack of bastards." ASIO was set up to crack a Soviet spy ring operating in Australia. The leader, codenamed Clod, was Communist Party member Wally Clayton. For decades, ASIO tried and failed to get Clayton to confess. Here for the first time is what ASIO was after. Clayton admits his role to Communist Party Secretary Laurie Ahrens.
These are plans of the gangsters and their military installations, the Pyrenees, the war.
And you passed it to someone and sent it to Moscow.
Went to Moscow back again within hours. The bloke saw me, wanted a lot more information immediately. I never had any queries of what I was doing. Only from a moral point of view.
Yeah.
Parties were coming with whatever cost.
With intelligence successes few, ASIO made itself indispensable to conservative governments as it watched, disrupted and demonised political opponents. The manipulation of information for political use has been part and parcel of ASIO's history. Gossip and rumour become fact.
And it's really been a blight on the democratic character of this country. To think that the country of Eureka should end up into the 21st century with a reactionary organisation like ASIO.
Recent leaks reveal governments spying on their own citizens on a massive scale. ASIO will argue that their excesses are in the past and that they are now closely monitored. However, recent events imply their competence has not improved and their excesses are being made law. Since 9/11, the powers of ASIO have increased enormously. Its budget has gone up 8 times and its staff numbers 4 times. 54 anti-terror laws have been enacted in Australia. ASIO's powers go far beyond those of the UK and the US. ASIO now has the power to detain people in secret for up to a week. That person has no right to remain silent, and refusal to answer questions is punishable by 5 years in jail. The detained person does not have to be told why they are being held. These are attacks on civil liberties, hard won over 800 years. There is no doubt there are violent people out there, but we already have ample laws to deal with them, and civil rights given away are hard to get back. With lives damaged, careers destroyed, and national culture hobbled by politicians and intelligence agencies peddling ill-defined fear, history shows the need for scepticism before handing more power to secret agencies.
Keep a healthy scepticism, which is always actually a great strength of Australia. We've always been sceptical about what governments tell us. We've turfed governments out from time to time, and that's our privilege, and we do it. So these are features of calling government and officials to account, and I think that's the true protection of freedom in our society, and it means we've got to call ASIO to account. That's the challenge of a free community, and it's a challenge that remains before us in Australia.
I think ASIO is looking at a very bright future. It's got a new building, an enormous building, with lots of antennas on top, with barbed wire fencing 8 foot high all around the building. This is a great symbol of what Australia is becoming, but from ASIO's point of view, yeah, it looks good.
Someone must have been telling lies about Joseph Kay. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but one morning he was arrested.
Oh, I never wanted to be Quasimodo.